Good morning and welcome to our second update series of the for the digital learning series. This is the update conversation I have with my colleague Alan Tate. My name is Christopher Reichert. I'm the treasurer of the MIT Sloan Boston Alumni Association and been involved with the CIO Symposium for a number of years. This conversation is going to last about 20 minutes, half hour. We'd love to hear from you. We're going to have a Q&A throughout. So at the bottom of your screen, if we're all familiar with Zoom, you should see a Q&A button. And feel free to chime in at any time with any questions you might have or comments or anything you want us to chat about. So with that, I'd like to welcome Alan Tate, Executive Chair of the MIT Sloan CIO Symposium and first chair of the Digital Learning Series. Welcome, Alan. Good to see you.
Hi, Christopher. How are you?
Wow, Boston is a completely different day today than yesterday. We had all that rain coming down and wind blowing, and today it's beautiful, sunny, blue skies.
I know. Yeah, we had a lot of tree damage up here in Bedford.
Yeah, I could hear the utility repair trucks out. Yeah, it was chopping down and chippers, and yeah, it was quite interesting. So let's see. Let's talk about our the last webinar that we had back in July, the cybersecurity.
So I thought that was a really good webinar. That was moderated by Carrie Perlson. And, one of the things that came to mind is that she just highlighted how, this COVID-19 has been a perfect storm for cybersecurity. She gave a number of statistics about the number of reports, over 100,000 reports of cybersecurity issues, $70 million in fraud. But at the same time, there was a lot of talk about how to handle cybersecurity issues because everybody, both customers and employees, are under a lot of stress due to the pandemic, and that certainly came out in the conversation.
Yeah, one of the things that I noted was one of the panelists was talking about how they had been doing these phishing tests on their employees for a long time, just to check and make sure people were staying sort of sharp on the dangers of phishing expeditions. And there was a conversation about how maybe we should pause that because people are at home, it's stressful, and it's confusing for them. And this one panelist said, no, we kept going because if anything, we want to keep their skills even sharper in their home networks.
Yeah, well, I mean, there was definitely a lot of talk about, how to be sensitive to the employees' needs. I recall one person did continue going. I think there was another panelist, that it was Katie, who did delay a little bit on that. But I remember Danny Allen also had a comment about how during the pandemic, he's working to sort of bring the humanity of being in person and working in the office to the digital world, continuing relations with his employees. And I think it really highlighted something that Carrie said, and this has really struck me about her, is that the cybersecurity talk, I think that people may have felt that it was a very technological talk, but in fact, she's very focused on values and attitudes and beliefs, and it really becomes a people problem from her point of view.
This is Carrie Perlson, you mean?
Yeah, Carrie Perlson.
Which in a shameless plug, I did a podcast with her back in October on the Sloanies Talking to Sloanies podcast series that I do, and she's a really, really interesting person. I was looking at their research that they're doing, which, by the way, if anyone's interested, it's at cams.mit.edu, which kind of expands on what MIT Sloan is doing for cybersecurity research, and they've got some interesting topics that they're teasing out. One of the ones is understanding the cyber attack business. So you talk about the human side of things, and for me that addresses, or that attempts to unpack the motivations for people to actually even get engaged in that sort of activity. What is driving them? And I think that there are a lot of parallels between that and political unrest as well. People with migrations and whatnot. But I don't want to diverge too far from cybersecurity.
Well, but actually that point came up in the conversation. And one of the things that struck me also about this webinar is just that there was a tremendous amount of audience engagement. There were a lot of questions that came through from the audience, and one of them was on exactly that point of, what is motivating the people. And so that went around the whole panel. I think that was toward the end of the panel discussion. So that's definitely was an important topic.
Yeah, and on their website, you can actually look at some of the research topics and some of the early findings that they have. There's another one here, the business of the dark web. And one of the other topics that one of the conversations in the podcast, in the webinar that we had in July, that I found interesting was the element of culture, again, the human component to it, of how do you build a culture where people are cautious but not shutting down in terms of their ability to collaborate with each other, because that's key to organizational success, is being able to work openly and freely with your colleagues and partners, business partners, or external and internal partners. And that's a challenge, I think, for an open society as well. Like, where's the balance that you strike between locking things down to such an extent that things can't get done, that you stymie innovation,
right?
Not keeping your risk profile as your footprint as small as possible.
So I would say if anybody's on this webinar and hasn't watched the recording, which is posted on our website, they definitely should. The webinar was broken into two parts. Carrie gave a 30-minute presentation in the beginning, and then they had about an hour panel discussion afterwards. And to your point about striking a balance, I thought that Carrie did a very good job in her presentation of being very pragmatic. So she went through 5 typical scams that are happening now in the COVID-19 environment. She basically went through them one by one and explained what they were, how you could get caught. And she really humanized it. I mean, literally one of the scams she was talking about that she fell into herself.
Which I was surprised to see.
I know, but her point was that anybody can get fooled, right? Even somebody who's doing cybersecurity research got taken. But then she also had 5 points of calls to action, and they were very pragmatic, down-to-earth things that anybody can do to protect themselves. And so that part of the webinar alone, I think, was extremely valuable.
I agree, and I think that it's sad on some level that we're still being caught out by what is basically the equivalent of the more sophisticated Nigerian bank scam, right? Same idea but it appeals basically to people's desire for whether it's financial freedom,
yeah,
and you make $1,000 a day or whatnot. And I guess the challenge obviously is to protect yourself without closing yourself off. I also thought it was really interesting how the challenge that I think technology leaders have in presenting the reality of the cybersecurity threat in terms that aren't binary. In other words, any breach doesn't mean complete failure. No breach means you may or may not be even detecting that you've been breached, right?
Right.
And so having that conversation at the executive leadership level and having the ability for all of your staff, I think in a technology or even in an organization, be able to understand that if you do have a breach, it's about risk mitigation, not about killing the messenger, so to speak.
Yeah, there was a lot of conversation in the panel about how to report your, how do you measure how well you're doing? How do you report that up to management? And how do you frame the questions correctly so that people would really understand? And there was a lot of emphasis about taking cybersecurity and transforming it into the perspective of business value, customer value, things that the executives can relate to, that customers can relate to. And, it was interesting. There was another thing that came out in the webinar about, getting back to COVID-19. And that was, the stress that a lot of organizations are under because they had to send their workforce out. So imagine a company, where they have their workforce, they're normally working on a desktop.
Right.
And all of a sudden, these people have to work at home. And so the IT department has to begin to equip people with laptops and put in new policies and keep things secure. I mean, it was really hard. And especially when you're in an international situation where you have different laws that you have to take care of. There was a lot of things that came out in the conversation that honestly I wasn't even aware of in terms of problems that CIOs are facing to deal with COVID-19.
Right. You may have had a plan for remote workers, but that could have been a proportion, a percentage of your workforce being remote, the ability to have a personal time or family time or whatnot. But yeah, overnight it was, 100% of your employees were remote.
Exactly.
Wow. And getting laptops in everybody's hands or whatnot. I mean, that was a challenge for schools as well, where, they're Chromebooks, but, the kids would come into a classroom and use it, put them back into charge, and then another class would come in. In other words, the device was reused, and all of a sudden, if they're all at home and there's this notion of remote learning, every kid in the school just needed a Chromebook. And not to mention, if you have multiple kids in one family, how do they handle that? Does everybody get one? I know that's a challenge in my family. Oh boy, not to mention all the other things.
Exactly.
Yeah, there was also, I think, I forget who it was, but maybe it was, I forget his name, from Mars. He talked about, Andrew, and it could have been somebody else. But the story was that, in pitching the risk mitigation cost element to it, because I think that's that's a challenge that a lot of technology leaders have, is how do you get this past people who don't want to spend the money on a potential risk that isn't real now, but that sort of thing. And he said, well, I mean, I guess we could have our site down for what's the tolerance we have for having our e-commerce down? Is it 1 hour? Is it 1 day? Is it 1 week? Is it 1 month? And what is the cost of having it down for those periods of times in terms of lost revenue and fixed costs and whatnot? And so you say, okay, well, there's one number, one scenario we can draw up. If it's 1 day and depends on your revenue, is that $5 million? Or is it $1, right? And if the tolerance isn't as high as the loss that you would incur, then there's a way of actually getting resources to apply to prevention before an event. Which I thought was an interesting.
Well, I thought Andrew in particular had a great way of taking every question and kind of reframing it in a different way. And I do remember that conversation. And he also talked about, explaining to people that it's not a question of when we're going to have a breach, that we will have a breach, and he went through the math. You have 1,000 different sites and however many employees, and it's just inevitable that you're going to run into some problems. And so he really put a focus on how do we respond to the problem that we know is coming.
Yeah, and I think there's a huge opportunity for entrepreneurs out there to provide more sophisticated home networking security guides, products, services for the remote workers, for organizations to bring to their remote workers, because I don't think this is going to go away anytime soon. And I think even if it does go away, I mean, I'm seeing all sorts of conversations about, well, do we actually need to go back to the old way, which was office-based teams? Can we really lean into all of these other remote technologies and communication technologies, whether it's Slack, Zoom, Google Meet, all of the Microsoft Meet as well. I mean, it's probably going to be the new norm. So anyway, I just throw that out there.
I would think so. Yeah. Well, so anyway, I thought it was a really excellent webinar. Yeah. I hope people attended, and if not, please watch the recording. I think you'll be time well spent.
Yeah, that's at mitcio.com, and you just go to the agenda page, and you'll see the link to all the videos, and watch them all. So you, Alan, we talked about a poll that you want to do for our.
I do want to do a poll.
Yeah, tell us about that.
So so basically, I've been thinking about 2021, and I just want to be clear to everyone that we're considering all options from fully having an in-person event, to having a hybrid event, to having a virtual event. And actually, we've put together a survey to get information from our audience about their willingness to be at an in-person event, but we're not going to send that out till the fall, because we think that it's better that people go through the experience of seeing universities and schools try to reopen and assess what's the impact of that. So we think
there's so many unknowns at the moment.
Yeah, so we think people's opinion about travel and being in person is going to evolve as we get used to the pandemic. So for the purpose of today, I'm really just focused on the possibility of, in 2021, delivering content virtually like we're doing now in 2020. And it's likely that 2021 will have some component of virtual content delivery.
Right.
And the question that I've been asking myself is, what's the style that our audience prefers for virtual content? So on the one extreme, you could deliver content in a symposium style, where you do all the content in one day, like we're doing the symposium. And at the other extreme, you deliver content in monthly webinars, which is more of the digital learning series style. So if you think about that as a spectrum, right, all in one day versus monthly. Let's say in 2021, it could be, say, February to June, 5 months like we did this year. Of course, this year we didn't start till June because of the pandemic, but next year, we would be in springtime, which is more or less when the CIO happens. I mean, for those that don't know, the Alumni Association runs the CIO Symposium in the spring, and then the CFO Summit in the fall, and that's kind of our schedule. So
yeah, so just on this, if anybody's interested in that, it's mitcfo.com. I mean, I want to come back to what they're planning on that for some things that might relate to our event.
Yeah, so we're focused on the springtime, which is where we should be, and so we want to get a sense on if the event was virtual, if the amount of content you receive is the same, no matter the delivery style, what would you prefer? So I'm going to pull up a poll here, and we'll see what people say.
Yeah, I'd be interested to see what people's responses are. I think the other component, so there's the content side, which we're proud of the content we produce. I think one of the elements that people are struggling with, particularly conference organizers, is the networking component, which brings people together for personal and professional advancement. And I think that's one of the hardest parts to capture. Although I think as this continues and as this kind of new norm, as this new becomes maybe the norm, I should say, do we think about things not as just a faster horse, but as a kind of new paradigm? And I think that's something that's evolving for everybody.
Yeah. Well, let's see. So results are coming in. We're at about 70%. So, so the majority of the audience prefers a monthly style. We have about 38% who strongly prefer monthly, 50% prefer monthly, and 13% prefer the symposium style. And now we have some more votes coming in, but I'll leave the poll open. Hopefully we can get a few more people to vote. But that's kind of interesting.
Yeah, that is interesting. I'd love to hear from people as well on what they think, and where would they want to send an email? What's the best email for?
Well, so actually, there's a few opportunities for people to add in their opinion on this. One, they can just put something in the Q&A right now for us to address right here. The second thing is we always have a survey question after the webinar, and it's an open question. You can put your thoughts in there. And if not, if you think of something later, you can always send your thoughts to info@mitccio.com. I read all of those emails that come in. And I'm definitely interested in hearing, what people think about content delivery.
Yeah, and I'd love to hear what maybe your organization is doing, whether it's virtual one day, virtual over a period of time, Also, love to hear some plans that people or other organizations are having on the networking side of things, and also with employees, but also with partners and their networks. Because we're all trying to learn how to do this better, and we'd love to hear some what you think is working out of your end, and actually even almost importantly is what isn't working out there. So
exactly.
So info at mitcio.com for anyone who's listening to this after the fact and maybe wasn't at a webinar and missed the survey.
So I'm just going to share the results with the audience so they can see. And there you go. That's what we got.
Interesting. No one strongly preferred the in-person, which is...
Well, I mean, so I expect that there's going to be a contingent of people. I mean, look, we all want to get back to the symposium. I think that goes without saying. We're anxious to have that format. The symposium has a lot of features that's hard to replicate online. The innovation showcase, the networking, are all components of the symposium. But the world is different, and we definitely wanted to find out how people felt. It's hard, I have to say, for me personally, it's hard in the virtual world to sit in front of my computer for 8 hours as compared to when I go to an event. There's a different energy when you're on site.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's the serendipity that's difficult, and I'd love to see if I know we are continually exploring other technological platforms to allow for that sort of serendipity, always keeping a focus on content. Speaking of content, I'm conscious of the time here. We started, so that's great that people are loving the kind of the monthly webinar series, because we've got another one coming up. But before we go to that one, because it relates to our first one on some level, so we started the whole series back on June 10th with artificial intelligence in the post-pandemic enterprise, which again, it's available to watch at mitcio.com. And we just talked about our last series on cybersecurity, but our next one coming up on August 12th is on the post-pandemic workplace and customer experience. So tell us a bit about that one. What excites you about that?
Yeah, so I think actually this is really going to be an interesting one. We're going to start out with Irving Velosky-Berger, who's a fellow at IDE. He's going to be talking about the post-pandemic in the workplace. We're actually having a few people return from last year. So S. Sundram, who's the Chief Digital and Technology Officer at JetBlue, and also the 2019 CIO Award winner, is going to be joining them. They're going to be doing a fireside chat. And then we have Paul Meckelman, who's the Editor-in-Chief of Sloan Management Review. He's also going to have some past favorites. So Akesh Kaherna, who's the CIO at McDermott, and then Gail Evans. Remember Gail? She was a CIO finalist, is going to be joining her. And then Renee Gosling, who is a researcher at IDE and actually just did a webinar on customer experience and in the changing world, which was very good. So I think in terms of understanding the employee situation, the workplace situation, as well as the customer experience in the COVID-19 world, we have a great cast of characters.
I agree. I'm looking at the kind of the organizations involved. I mean, it's a nice balance between large organizations like JetBlue and some really good research coming out of MIT. And, at the end of the day, Irving Velosky-Berger is a treasure. He's brings out great conversations. He's delightful to listen to, and he has some great thoughts. So I think that alone would be a reason to attend that one, in my opinion.
Oh, definitely. Irving, by the way, is part of the organizing team. He's on the speaker recruitment team, and he is, for me, just a pleasure to work with, and really has helped immensely in pulling together the entire digital learning series. And also, I have to say that it's really great as we've been pulling this together to have all of the CIO award finalists as kind of alumni and
Yeah.
come back, and their willingness to come back and support the program is fantastic.
Yeah, that is amazing. I mean, when we started that back in 2008, the idea was to celebrate excellence in professions, and turning it into an informal or semi-formal alumni network, I think, is a great pivot on that, because people really want to keep the conversations going, and these are very interesting people at the top of their profession who can give some great insights. So, well, with that,
I
I
would
think,
also say too, just August. I think it's going to be great. It's next week. You should definitely register. But the other episodes, episode 4 and 5, are up on the website. All the speakers except for one. We have only one speaker left to put in place. They're all up on the website, and so those panels are there. You can register now, and I'll say ahead of time, I have received the feedback that people in 2021 would like to register for the whole series at once. I get that. Keep in mind that 2020 was a trial, and so it's not quite as slick, but we will be improving.
yeah, it's an iterative process. So, anything else you want to mention today before we close it out?
No, I think it's good. I'm excited for next week. I hope a lot of people attend. I think I think the first 2 sessions have been fantastic. I think this will be right up there with the other ones.
That's excellent. So thanks very much to Alan Tate, the executive chair of the MIT Sloan CIO Symposium, the leader of the digital learning series, for joining us today.
All right. Thanks a lot, Christopher.
And I want to mention that we have a lot of different ways to connect with us. So we have our social media links, whether it's on Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, and email addresses there. And of course, none of this would be possible without our sponsors who make this all happen for us. So I'd like to give them a shout out as well. So thanks very much for joining us today.